Well, Shabbat Shalom, and it's great to have our first official gathering together with real people.
Last week was a bit.
Yeah. Well, Shavuot, but this is like our first Shabbat. So today we're going to be primarily in Isaiah chapter 58, because it's part of our daily readings, and a reading. Yesterday's reading was very apt to where we are in our discussions of the church and the whole grace versus law issue, and we are meeting on Shabbat, and we are doing our best to follow God's principles and precepts, and dare I say laws, again, that requires some discernment as to which laws exactly, because there's some laws for men, there's some laws for women, there's some laws for priests, and so not all the laws apply to everyone. And there are things that are specific to Israel for a time, for a purpose, which was the symbol of the kingdom of heaven. And so it requires discernment as to what, how and what we follow. We follow it all, but what applies to us, particular to me personally, today. So, meeting on Shabbat and observing the Shabbat, we would be accused of being Torahites, and law keepers, and we're not under law anymore, we're under grace. And what's this keeping of the law? Anyway, so it's a long discussion. Today I just wanted to focus on Isaiah 58, because Isaiah 58 raises a very pertinent point as far as that is concerned. So let's read Isaiah 58 verses 1 and 2, verse 1 and 2, and verses 12 to 14. Does someone want to read it? Well, let me read it, because I've got the microphone in front of me, so I'll have to give. Cry aloud, do not hold back. Raise your voice like a shofar. Tell my people their transgressions, and the house of Yaakov their sins. Yet they seek me day to day, and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that did right, and had not forsaken their God's decree. They ask me for righteous judgments. They delight in the nearness of God. Why have we fasted, yet you do not see? And then he goes on to describe Israel's response to God that's not paying attention to them, it would seem, and yet they have been so good in pursuing God. And then it comes to verse 12, and then he says, some of you will rebuild the ancient ruins, will raise up the age-old foundations, will be called repairer of the breach, restorer of streets for dwelling. If you turn back your foot from Shabbat, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call Shabbat a delight, the holy day of Yahuwah, honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, not seeking your own pleasure, nor speaking your usual speech, then you will delight yourself in Yahuwah, and I will let you ride over the heights of the earth. I will feed you with the heritage of your father Yaakov, for the mouth of Yahuwah has spoken. So if we go back to verses 1 and 2, and we understand that Isaiah is speaking to Israel. But if you look at the parallel, if you consider, as we read that, you consider where the church is today. So cry aloud, do not hold back, raise your voice like a shofar, tell my people their transgression, and the house of Yaakov their sins. Yet they seek me day to day, and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that did right, and had not forsaken their God's decree. So if we consider that in the context of the church today, is a movement that seeks God. They seek God day to day. They apparently delight to know his ways. Most churches and pastors will say, obey, we must obey God. Usually, their understanding of what it means to obey God is that small voice. So God is spoken of as having a still small voice, and he speaks to you, and you must obey. This is generally the church's view of what it means to obey God, not his scriptures, his Torah, what he's recorded. So the Old Testament, the Tanakh, the first covenants, plural, because there were a number of covenants, those are not the things we are to obey, because now we know the Old Testament is done away with. That was old. That was Israel. That's now been replaced by the New Testament, and the New Testament's all about grace. And so we're to do the things of the New Testament, and we are to hear and obey that still small voice when God gives us instructions. And so if he tells you to go and speak to that poor man on the corner of the street, don't disobey. You must obey, and you must go and do that. And so the understanding of what it is to obey is confused, is misguided. So they seek me day to day, would be true of the church. They delight to know my ways. That would be true of the church. In as far as their interpretation of what God's ways are would come through the New Testament, and as if they were a nation that did right, and had not forsaken their God's decrees. So the decrees are the Torah. It's those things that God has spoken. These are the things that are determined to be good. And many of them were established in the nation of Israel, was established by God to be a blueprint for the kingdom of heaven. So God wasn't just establishing a nation because he happened to like the Israelites. There were no Israelites. There was Abraham. There was a man from Ever, the Ivrites, which is where the word Israelite comes from. And he sent this man away from his home, away from his people and his home in what is today Iraq, Iran, Babylon area, Ur of the Chaldeans, and he sent him to this land unknown to him, the land of the Canaanites, and then sent his offspring off to Egypt, a family of 70 odd, the family plus all their followers, their servants and so on, sent them into Egypt, and there they became a people, not a nation, a people, because they were descendants of this one family. They were a genetically unique people who grew for 400 years in Egypt, and they were kept. It was literally a crucible where God established. They were kept because of racism, dare I say. They were kept apart from the Egyptians. They were kept. They came as pastoralists, and so Joseph, being in favor with the Pharaoh, was able to get them the prize pasture land to dwell in, being pastoralists, and so they had a particular place, geographic area to occupy, and then they grew, and because of their rapid and fertile growth, it started to worry the Pharaoh, because they were growing so quickly. They were going to become a problem to the Egyptians, and so they started to oppress the Hebrews. because they were growing too much, and so they needed to keep them contained, keep them under control, keep them. And so in that scenario, Israel, the Hebrews, were kept pure, as it were. They were their genetics and their peoplehood was kept unique and kept pure by being in this crucible. And then, of course, we know the story how they came out of Egypt, and then in the desert, God established them as a nation, gave them the things that a nation requires: a law, a system of governance, a religion, and traditions, things that every nation has. Theirs were very, very, very unique because God was establishing them as something different to the nations of the world. And so they were set apart to be unique, to be a mirror, an example of what the kingdom of heaven would look like in a physical sense. So the kingdom of heaven, when we come to the new covenant, we see the spiritual aspects being applied to the physical reality. And so then our eyes are opened to the physicality, the spirituality of the kingdom of heaven, which the physical aspects point to, but do not are not in contradiction with and do not disappear, because there is coming a time when we will yet be a physical people. And so the Messiah will return. He will rule and reign on earth for 1,000 years. Those faithful will be his government. And those laws that were established by God will be in effect in the millennium, in the time of the Messiah. And so it's a blueprint that the spiritual aspects that we now know do not do away with any more than we Gentile believers do away with the Jews or Israel. So the parallels are there between what God speaks of to Israel through the prophet Isaiah in their thinking that they are on the right footing with God, in the right process. The church is in exactly the same place today, thinking that the church thinks it's right and everyone else is wrong, and Israel has been done away with. That Israel has messed up, and God had to intervene and establish the new covenant with the Gentiles, and we are now spiritual Israel, and there is no more talk of physical Israel or the Jews in Israel, and so it's all done away with. What we find, because we're under grace now, we're no longer under law. What we find in the Tanakh, in the prophets, in the writings, all through the scriptures, the Old Testament scriptures, is that salvation, as we understand salvation now as Gentile believers, was always through faith. It was never through keeping the law. We see that in Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. Genesis, I'll just read this one for you. It was when God speaks to Abraham, and Abraham believes God. Genesis 15, verse 6. I'll go from verse 4. Then behold, the word of Yahuwah came to him, saying, This one will not be your heir, but in fact, one who will come from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and said, Look up now at the sky and count the stars, if you are able to count them. Then he said to him, So shall your seed be. Then he believed in Yahuwah, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. So Abraham and Sarah have now tried to take matters into their own hands, and they have Ishmael, and God says, No. He's not the son of the promise. He's still to come. And as the stars of this, if you can count the stars, so will your offspring be. And so Abraham believes him, and it's counted to him as righteousness. So we have a first, I don't know if it's the first, certainly not the first, but a first, certainly a record written down of a demonstration of faith, of belief, of trusting in God. That's what faith is. It's trusting in God. It's trusting in the word of God, trusting in the promises of God, trusting in what God has said. That is faith. If I trust, truly believe and trust. So trust is usually accompanied by a demonstration, because it's not just a intellectual assent. It's if you trust, then you put into practice. It's like that the little boy. I love the story. I heard it many years ago of a drought, and the townsfolk go to the church hall to have a prayer meeting to pray for rain and the breaking of the drought. And the little boy rocks up with an umbrella, and everyone laughs at him because they're in the middle of a drought. What's he carrying an umbrella for? He says, well, didn't we come to pray for rain? That is true trust, because believing in what God will do or what God has said he will do. And so you put into action based on what God has said. And so that is trust. And so Abraham is credited with faith, trust. Um, in Hebrews chapter 11, I'm not going to read it now, but in Hebrews chapter 11, read chapter 11, it's called, someone called it the Hall of Faith. You know, we have the Hall of Fame. It's the Hall of Faith, because the writer to the Hebrews goes through all the great men of the I think there are women involved there too. Yes, even the prostitute Rahab is in the list. It's the Hall of Faith. It's a list of throughout of all those who demonstrated faith in God. So it's called the Hall of Faith, and so we see the writer to the Hebrews reflecting on, if I can put it that way, salvation by faith in the Old Testament. Someone will say, but it says, if you. So throughout the Old Testament, I use the term Old Testament simply because that's what people understand, what I'm referring to. It's the Tanakh. The Tanakh is an acronym for the Torah, the writings. I forget what the writings, and the prophets. So Tanakh. Throughout there is the exhortation: if you do such and such, God will. So people naturally think, oh well, you see, it's not by faith, it's by works, because it requires you to keep the Torah, and therefore we are saved. In the Old Testament, they were saved by works. They were saved by keeping the law. It's not by faith, it's by works. It says it over and over and over. Well, if we look at verses 13 to 14, that is Isaiah 58. If you turn back your foot from the Shabbat, so there it is, if you turn back your foot from Shabbat, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call Shabbat a delight, the holy day of Yahuwah honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, not seeking your own pleasure, nor speaking your usual speech, then you will delight yourself in Yahuwah, and I will let you ride over the heights of the earth. That's the key verse 14. Then you will delight yourself in Yahuwah. It's the line and the truth that separates heart devotion from legalistic observance. So he's not saying, if you do these things in a legalistic fashion, if you remember to tick every T or check every box, cross every T and dot every I, if you remember to do everything right, then God's going to honor you. No, he's not saying that. He's saying, essentially, that line, verse 14, reflects back on those if yous as a demonstration of delighting in God. So it changes it from being a legalistic observance to being something that has been done from a heart of devotion to God. Hasn't been done for brownie points or for a score, or any kind of reward. It's been done from a heart devoted to God. I can say this with absolute confidence. You will say, oh, well, that's reading a bit into the passage. Well, let's go to Isaiah chapter 1, right from the very beginning of Isaiah. The same truth is implicit. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 4. So right off the bat, he starts to reprimand Israel. Oi, O sinful nation, a people weighed down with iniquity, offspring of evildoers, sons dealing corruptly. They have abandoned Yahuwah. So right off the bat, all of the sins that were to follow, everything that he would describe of what they were, is summed up in that one line: they have abandoned Yahuwah. So they have turned their back on their God. And then he goes on from verse 11 to say, for what is it to me, the multitude of your sacrifices, says Yahuwah? I am full of burnt offerings of rams and fat of fed animals. I have no delight in the blood of bulls or of lambs or of he-goats. When you come to appear before me, who has required these things at your hand, trampling my courts? Bring no more worthless offerings. Incense is an abomination to me. New moon and Shabbat, the calling of convocations, I cannot endure it. Iniquity with solemn assembly. Your new moons and your festivals my soul hates. They are a burden to me. I am weary to bear them. When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. When you multiply prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. So all of those things that he lists are things that he commanded that Israel observe. The Shabbat, the new moons, the festivals, the sacrifices of lambs. These are all the things that God commanded Israel to observe. Now he's saying to them, I hate them. So implicit in that is the fact that they abandoned Yahuwah. So that would mean that they are doing these things because they were commanded to do them. So they were doing what they were commanded to do, yet without a devotion to God. So it means that their heart attitude was incorrect. And there is the difference between legalistic observance and what we just read about being devoted to God. That heartfelt devotion, that heart attitude. In chapter 2, verse 13, it's not 13, it's verse 3, is it? Or is it verse 13? Was it verse 13? I've got a smudge on my page. Yeah, must be 3. Then many peoples will go and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahuwah, to the house of Yaakov. Then he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For Torah will go forth from Zion, and the word of Yahuwah from Jerusalem. So there is a future hope in which Torah, the law, is going to go forth from Zion, Jerusalem. And so far from being done away with, it is the blueprint of the kingdom of heaven, which will be in effect in the future. Yaakov, James, he says in chapter 2, it's only called James because the King James had to have James in the book, but his name is Yaakov, Jacob, his real name, the brother of Yeshua, is Yaakov. Chapter 2, verses 14 to 26. 14 to 26. It says, What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can such faith save him? If a brother or a sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in shalom, keep warm and well fed," but you do not give them what the body needs, what good is that? So also, faith, if it does not have works, is dead by itself. But someone will say, "You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without works, and I will show you faith by my works." You believe that God is one? You do well. The demons also believe and shudder. But do you want to know, you empty person, that faith without works is dead? Wasn't Abraham, our father, proved righteous by works when he offered up Isaac, his son, on the altar? You see that faith worked together with his work, and by the works his faith was made complete. The scripture was fulfilled. It says, "And Avram believed God, and it was credited him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend." You see that a man is proved righteous by works and not by faith alone. And likewise, wasn't Rachav, the prostitute, also proved righteous by works when she welcomed the messengers and sent them out another way? For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. Now, many people have said in the past that James and Paul were contradicted each other, because Paul preached grace and James preached works. If you study them both, you will, and the whole of Scripture, what I'm describing to you today, you will see that actually they are in absolute harmony with each other. There is no contradiction, there's no conflict, because both, they go together. As James said, faith without works is dead, and faith with works, the works makes the faith complete. And so the two go hand in hand, and if there are no works, it means that the faith that one professes is questionable, because it would naturally flow. If the Spirit of God is within you, it is the Spirit of God who produced these things, then it would naturally flow good works, which starts with Torah, not just doing good deeds for other people or doing good for the poor or whatever, but when he's speaking about works, he's speaking about observance, obedience to God. And so it flows naturally from a heart of devotion to God. As we read in Isaiah, it is that devotion to God that causes us. We want to observe Shabbat because we have this desire. It's not anything anyone has told us to do. It's just this desire that we have to want to honor God, our Father, want to please Him, want to do what He has said we must do. That is our desire. And so it flows naturally from within us, and it should, for all true believers who are truly elect, it should naturally flow. It should be this thing inside. That's why I pray always for my loved ones, that they will have an unsettled spirit, that they will not be satisfied with what they get out there that's not the whole truth, that they will continue to seek for the truth. Verse 15 of James, just to bring this back to Isaiah, because it's, as I was saying, they're not in conflict, they go hand in hand. Verse 15, it says, "Can such a faith save him? If a brother or a sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, 'Go in shalom, keep well and well fed,' but do not give them what the body needs, what good is that?" So in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17, we read up until 15, and it's the passage about God hating these things that he determined Israel should do. And so what is the converse? He says from verse 16, "Wash and make yourselves clean. Put away the evil of your deeds from before my eyes. cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, relieve the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. This speaks of a heart that is devoted to God, the good that comes into that heart, a heart that is devoted to God, is transformed from a heart of stone, as Ezekiel says, to a heart of flesh. When you have a heart of flesh, what follows naturally from a heart of flesh is compassion. Compassion for the elderly, for the poor, for the sick, for widows and for orphans. Yeshua, I think it was, who said that the only, paraphrasing horribly, but the only religion that is worth anything is to take care of widows and orphans. That's true religion. Every other form of religion is something else. So what James says about seeing someone hungry and not providing for them with food is in line with what Isaiah says, with what is stems from a heart of devotion, is that compassion for the poor and the needy. That's the kind of fruit that a heart filled with the Spirit produces. So, as I mentioned earlier, if we go to Isaiah chapter 2, back to Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 and 3. We just read it a moment ago. It will come to pass in the last days that the mountain of Yahuwah's house will stand firm as head of the mountains and will be exalted above the hills. So all nations will flow to it. Then many peoples will go and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of Yahuwah, to the house of the God of Yaakov. Then he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For Torah will go forth from Zion, and the word of Yahuwah from Jerusalem. So that is a prophecy concerning the time of the end. The time of the end, Isaiah calls the last days. The last days is that 1,000-year reign of Yeshua, when he comes and he will reign for 1,000 years. And again, as I said last week, read Ezekiel from chapter 40. There's a description of what will transpire in Jerusalem, in Zion, the new temple. And from there, the Torah will go forth, and we will be taught his paths. All of those who are least in the kingdom, because they refuse to observe the ways of Yahuwah, will have to be taught, because they haven't been paying attention to what his word said in this age. And so they will teach. Then he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. And so it is more blessed to know and understand and to do it from now already. So when the time comes, as I said last week, we will be that much more qualified and equipped and ready, and I dare say higher on the ladder of the government, if you like. So the Torah, the law, will be in effect in the millennium, as it is today, but people refuse to accept it. Amen. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
We're gonna close.